April 8, 1940, the Norwegian Sea. A lone British destroyer cuts through freezing waves, her decks slick with sleet, her crew exhausted but ready. On the horizon, smoke, then shapes. German warships. One of them, a heavy cruiser 5 times her size, Admiral Hipper. Most would turn and run, but HMS Glowworm doesn't run. With her guns blazing and boilers screaming, she charges straight into the storm. This isn't a battle. It's a suicide run, one that will echo through naval history forever. The story of HMS Glowworm doesn't start with heroism. It starts with bad weather. Early April 1940, the Royal Navy's 2nd Destroyer Flotilla was escorting the battlecruiser Renown off the Norwegian coast. Their mission, intercept German forces suspected of preparing an invasion. But in the North Sea, weather is an enemy of its own. Heavy seas slammed into the destroyers, scattering them across the gray horizon. When dawn broke, Glowworm was gone, separated from the fleet by a raging gale. Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roop, just 35 years old, was her captain. His orders were simple: rejoin Renown as soon as possible. But fate had other plans. As the storm calmed, Glowworm picked up survivors from the sea, men from another destroyer, HMS Glowworm's sister ship, lost to the same storm. Then came a strange sight: 2 small ships barely visible through mist and spray. German destroyers. Roop gave the order. Action stations. Glowworm's guns roared to life, spitting fire and smoke across the waves. Shells screamed overhead. One German ship took a hit. The other disappeared into fog, running hard. Roop pursued. For an hour, the British destroyer chased her unseen prey through rolling seas, unaware that this hunt would lead her straight into the jaws of death, because beyond that curtain of mist waited something colossal: 14,000 tons of German steel, bristling with guns. The heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, and she was waiting. Out of the mist, Admiral Hipper appeared like a mountain of steel. 6 10-feet long, 8-inch guns glinting through the haze. Compared to her, Glowworm was a toy, a 350-ton destroyer with 4 4.7-inch guns and a few torpedo tubes. But Roop didn't flinch. He ordered his crew to open fire. Glowworm's guns barked. The first salvo fell short. The second splashed against the cruiser's armor. The third struck home. A shell ripped across Hipper's deck, sending sparks and fragments into the air. But the German reply was merciless. 8-inch shells tore through the sea, exploding around Glowworm like thunderclaps. The destroyer shook violently as near misses ripped holes through her hull. Every time she crested a wave, fountains of water crashed over the bow. Inside, the crew fought to keep her alive, passing shells hand to hand, sealing ruptured pipes, shouting through the smoke and noise. On Hipper's bridge, Captain Helmuth High watched the tiny destroyer dancing through gunfire like a wild animal refusing to die. He ordered his gunners to finish it, but Glowworm wouldn't stop. Roop threw the helm hard over, weaving, dodging, firing everything he had. The sea boiled with shrapnel and spray. When Roop saw the range close to just over 9,000 yards, he made a decision that stunned everyone on board. Torpedo attack. Full speed ahead! The destroyer surged forward, engines screaming at 30 knots. Every man on board knew the odds. Hipper's armor could shrug off destroyer shells, but not a torpedo. If just one struck her side, it could cripple or even sink the cruiser. Glowworm launched her first spread. 10 torpedoes streaking through the water, white wakes cutting toward the enemy. I ordered evasive maneuvers. Hipper turned sharply, the torpedoes passing harmlessly astern. Now Glowworm was exposed, out in the open, her torpedo tubes empty. And the German guns had found their mark. A shell hit the bridge. Another tore through the forward boiler room. Fire and steam erupted below decks. Men screamed orders through the smoke as the ship listed to port. Still, Roop held his position. Even bleeding, burning, and broken, Glowworm fought back, one destroyer defying a cruiser's wrath. On Hipper, High could barely believe it. The British captain wasn't retreating. He was closing in. Roop was steering his ship directly toward the German cruiser. The British destroyer's bow cut through the waves, black smoke trailing, her guns still hammering. Every man aboard now knew what their captain intended. The ship's telegraph clanged one last order: prepare to ram. The order hit the crew like a shockwave: prepare to ram. It wasn't just reckless, it was suicide. But no one hesitated. Men at their stations clung to their posts, faces streaked with oil and sweat, as Glowworm's bow rose and fell through the gray seas. Smoke belched from her funnels, the deck shuddering under the strain of her engines. Ahead, Admiral Hipper loomed like a fortress. Her captain, Helmuth High, had never seen anything like this. A single destroyer, crippled in a blaze, charging head-on toward his 14,000-ton cruiser. "Hard to starboard!" he barked, but Glowworm was already too close. The range collapsed, 1,000 yards. 800, 500 shells crashed into the destroyer, ripping apart her aft section. But Roop didn't turn away. Standing on the open bridge, wind whipping through torn canvas, he shouted the final order, "Ram her!" With a scream of tortured steel, HMS Glowworm slammed into Admiral Hipper's starboard bow. The impact threw men off their feet. Metal shrieked. Glowworm's sharp prow tore a 50-foot gash in the cruiser's hull, ripping open armor plating and sending debris flying across the deck. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Even the thunder of the guns went silent. The destroyer clung to the cruiser's side like a wounded animal still biting back. Then, with engines reversing and her hull breaking apart, Glowworm slid away, her bow twisted and mangled, but she wasn't finished yet. Her torpedo crew, soaked, burned and bleeding, had managed to reload a final spread. As Glowworm drifted past the German cruiser, they fired. The torpedoes streaked out, slicing toward Hipper's flank. One missed. Another passed beneath her keel. But the third came so close it forced High to swing the cruiser hard over, nearly grounding her in rough seas. The crippled destroyer was breaking apart, her stern awash, fires raging from bow to bridge. Inside the engine room, men were trapped behind twisted metal, fighting to vent steam before it cooked them alive. On the upper decks, others hurled anything they could, shells, signal lamps, even debris, into the sea to lighten the ship. Roop stood calmly amid the chaos. Smoke and flame surrounded him. He knew Glowworm wouldn't survive another hit. But his crew still manned their guns, firing at the German cruiser as long as one shell remained. A single British destroyer, covered in fire, was trading blows with one of Hitler's newest warships, and for a brief, terrible moment, Admiral Hipper was the one retreating. High watched in silence. Through his binoculars, he saw the British destroyer listing sharply, her guns falling silent one by one. The fight was over, but the courage before him was unforgettable. Then came the end. Glowworm's boilers exploded. A rolling fireball tore through her hull, splitting the ship apart. The bow sank first, plunging beneath the waves, dragging the stern upward before it too vanished into the icy North Sea. The sound faded, leaving only wind and waves. Out of 149 men aboard Glowworm, only 31 were pulled from the freezing water, by none other than Admiral Hipper. Captain High himself stood on deck, ordering his sailors to haul the survivors aboard. Among them was Gerard Roop, the man who had rammed his ship. Soaked, injured, and barely conscious, Roop saluted the German captain who had watched his final charge. High returned the salute. Then, as Roop was taken below for medical care, the British commander, exhausted and broken, slipped away into death. He never lived to see what his act would mean to history. The sea was quiet again. Only the hiss of waves against steel broke the silence. The wreckage of HMS Glowworm drifted in the gray swell. Broken planks, lifebelts, oil slicks stretching for miles. The smell of smoke and cordite lingered, faint but unmistakable, like the ghost of battle. On Admiral Hipper's deck, German sailors worked in grim silence, hauling British survivors out of the freezing water. Some men were unconscious, others shaking uncontrollably, their lips blue from the cold. The North Sea in April doesn't forgive. Its temperature kills in minutes. Captain Helmuth High watched every man brought aboard. "No more enemy," he told his officers quietly. "Only sailors." He knew what he had witnessed was not ordinary courage. Hay had fought in the First World War. He'd seen death, bravery, and madness. But nothing compared to what he'd just witnessed. A lone destroyer, hopelessly outgunned, refusing to surrender. A captain who chose to ram a cruiser rather than strike his colors. Below decks, the survivors were given blankets and hot coffee. German medics treated their wounds as best they could. Many of the British sailors could barely speak. Their faces were pale with shock, eyes wide with disbelief. Some asked about their captain. None yet knew that Lieutenant Commander Gerard Roop, the man who had led them into that impossible charge, was gone. When the reality finally reached them, there was no outburst, no sound. Just quiet. In the following hours, Admiral Hipper resumed her mission. The invasion of Norway, Operation Weserübung, had already begun. High filed his report, noting the details of the engagement, the ramming, and the rescue of survivors. But he added something rarely seen in a wartime document, a personal tribute. In his official report to the German High Command, High wrote, "The conduct of the commander and crew of the Glowworm was of the highest order. They fought with exceptional bravery and skill, and even when their ship was lost, they continued to resist. Their captain deserves the highest recognition." He didn't stop there. Hay later sent a letter, through the International Red Cross, directly to the British Admiralty. In it, he praised Roop's courage and urged that he be honored, even by his enemies. That single act of respect crossed enemy lines in the middle of a world at war. It would take 5 years before the message reached its destination. When it did, the war was ending. Germany was in ruins, but among the flood of reports and documents reaching London, one stood out, a German captain's testimony about a British destroyer's final stand. The Admiralty investigated, interviewing survivors and examining High's report. Everything matched. Every man confirmed that Roop had led them in an attack no one could have survived, and that he had done it knowing full well what awaited them. On July 6, 1945, Lieutenant Commander Gerard Broadmead Roop was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor for valor. He became the first naval officer of the Second World War to receive it, and the only one to be nominated by the enemy. The citation read, "For valor in the face of overwhelming odds, for continuing the fight until the enemy was rammed and disabled, and for inspiring his ship's company by his courage and example." For the men who survived, that medal wasn't just for their captain, it was for Glowworm herself. The ship that had been outmatched in every possible way, smaller, slower, weaker, had shown what the Royal Navy's creed really meant. If you can't win, make them remember you, and they did. Years later, survivors from Admiral Hipper and Glowworm would meet again, not as enemies, but as old sailors bound by the same sea. Hay himself lived to see the war end. When interviewed decades later, he still spoke of Glowworm with quiet admiration. "It was the bravest thing I have ever seen," he said. "A ship that had no chance, yet fought as if she could win. The sea holds no monuments, no headstones. But in that cold expanse of water north of Trondheim, there is one place where two nations' histories collide, where courage met steel and duty overcame fear. And if you sail there on a calm day, when the mist lifts and the wind falls silent, you might still imagine the faint echo of gunfire, the last roar of a destroyer that refused to die quietly." The story of HMS Glowworm didn't end with her sinking. It lived on, whispered in naval mess halls, retold in classrooms, and studied by officers who understood that bravery can outshine firepower. In a war filled with massive fleets, grand strategies, and industrial might, Glowworm's last stand was something different. It was a reminder of the human heart inside every machine of war. Gerard Roop's Victoria Cross, the one recommended by his enemy, became one of the most extraordinary awards in British naval history. It represented more than gallantry. It represented honor that transcended nations, a bond between sailors who fought each other yet shared the same code: courage, duty, and respect for the sea. When the war ended, survivors of Glowworm returned home with scars that ran deeper than wounds. Some never spoke of that morning again. Others told it like a legend, the day their ship charged a monster and made the world remember her name. They'd describe Roop standing on the bridge, soaked and steady, his cap lost to the wind, his voice cutting through chaos with one impossible order: "Ram her," even the Germans remembered. Helmut High's name faded into the archives of history, but his testimony kept Roop's heroism alive. In a war of propaganda and hatred, High's gesture was almost unthinkable, a salute across battle lines from one captain to another. Today, the wreck of HMS Glowworm rests 400 meters below the Norwegian Sea, a twisted relic draped in silence. Divers who've reached her describe it as haunting, gun barrels still pointing forward, as if she's still charging. Her hull bears the scars of impact, frozen in the instant of defiance that defined her. There's no sound down there now, just darkness and cold. Yet for those who know the story, Glowworm never truly sank. Her courage became immortal, carried through every tale of men who refused to surrender. Because sometimes, the measure of a ship isn't the tonnage of her guns or the armor on her hull. It's the fire in the hearts of the men aboard her. And on that day in 1940, no ship burned brighter than HMS Glowworm,